All right, we're live. How about that,
We
Matthew?
are. Yes, we are live.
That's a thing. So, man, today's going to be crazy. It's going to be crazy because me and Matthew always pick the coolest stuff to talk about when Riley is not around.
And he's not around.
He's not around. So today we get to do something really fun and different, and I'm pretty stoked about it. We're going to do our first ever debate on the podcast. Now, obviously, I think we have a lot of topics we discuss on the podcast where we attempt to discuss both sides of an issue, but we do it in as who we are, just how we feel about something and trying to recognize that there are alternative points of view. But today's going to be different because today we're going to straight up get in character. One of us is going to own one side of this debate, and the other person is going to own the other side of the debate. So it's going to be lots of fun. Bobby, welcome. Thanks for being here. Randy, welcome. Thanks for being here. Sorry we are 13 minutes late. We were trying really hard to get done on time today, and then I got distracted. A member of our team was doing all this research for me, and I was stuck staring at this research. I assigned a member of our team to actually put together a spreadsheet, Matthew. You're going to love this spreadsheet, where they compared handgun vaults for sale from various different companies. So, for example, on this spreadsheet, it has different companies that have clamshell style safes, how big the safe is, MSRP, market value, and other research related things, so that I can compare all of the competing products in that arena. It's going to be really cool.
Oh, good deal.
Yeah, we're thinking about making safes, and so I need to have really good market, analysis or comparison, I guess. Welcome, Gary, Diane, Ted, Rodney. Yeah, Riley's not here today, and he's not going to get in on the sweet fun of this because he's not here. That's the deal. When Riley is taking a gun class today, he's shooting stuff, and so me and Matthew get to do the podcast, which means we picked something we thought would be epic to do without Riley.
Fun. It'll be fun.
It's going to be awesome.
See what we can do.
Yep. So I think we're going to go ahead and dive right into the recording. So here we go in 3, 2, 1. This is the Concealed Carry Podcast, episode 447. Welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast. I am your co-host, Jacob Paulson. Today, Riley is MIA. He is on a gun range somewhere shooting stuff. And so I am joined by co-host Matthew Marister.
I'm the co-host.
The co-host.
Yes.
So we're going to have a great episode for you today. We're really excited. We're going to be essentially debuting a brand new format, a thing that we hope to do with lots of different topics in the future, but this will be our first attempt at this format. We picked a topic that we thought would be easier for us, since this is going to be the first time we're ever doing this, and this format is all about debate. We are going to, Matthew and I, each take one side of an issue and just own it and really debate it. And because we're virtual and Matthew's in Ohio and I'm here in Colorado, neither of us can punch the other one or scream or yell. There's no moderator here, so we'll see who's most forceful at owning the microphone. I've got a feeling it's going to be me, and it's going to be super fun. So stay tuned for that. But first, a message from our sponsors. Today's sponsor is Vis Sites. I'm a fan of Vis. I have Vis Sites currently. They're Lightwave H3s on my Glock 19, which is a gun I use a considerable amount. And I like Vis. First and foremost, I'll just tell you that one of the best things about Vis, and no one else is going to care about this like I do, but they're based in Wyoming. So they're clearly God country, gun-loving folk, because they're headquartered in Laramie, Wyoming, and nothing is headquartered in Laramie, Wyoming. So props to Vis for being awesome people and an awesome company. We stop by their booth every year at SHOT Show. We're familiar with a lot of members of their team, and they put out a good product. And the new H3 sights are amazing. I figure if something was good enough for Jerry Michalek, it's got to be good enough for me, Matthew. What do you think?
I think that's solid logic. I think that's good. He seems like a pretty squared away guy though when it comes to gun modifications and gun stuff. So I think he's a good guy to follow.
Yeah, the Vis shooting team is pretty broad. I figure if Max Michel is putting these sights on his gun, they're probably pretty good for me. Yeah. So anyway, Vis Sites, check them out. Vis, Hiviz, sites.com, and consider them for your next sites upgrade. Okay, so with that, Matthew, let's do this thing.
All right, let's try it out.
So here's the disclaimer. Today, in today's episode, I guess, if I had an attorney here, he'd write something fancy, and it would probably say something like, the comments in this episode do not necessarily reflect the opinions and views of Concealed Carry Inc. or the participating, hosts. That sounds pretty legal sounding, right?
Right. I get it.
The short of it is Matthew and I have picked a topic. Today it's going to be gun modifications and upgrades, and we have chosen in advance who is going to take which side of the debate. And we are going to own that side of the debate regardless of our personal feelings. So I am going to own the side of the debate that is no gun modifications, no upgrades. I believe in a stock gun. I'll make my opening argument here in a moment. Matthew is going to own the side of the debate that is strictly no, your gun should look like, somebody took an AR-15 and puked it up. And it's just got stuff all over it. It's all sorts of upgraded and awesome sauce. And that makes you awesomer, cooler, and a better shooter. And obviously the correct answer is probably somewhere in the middle. There's your spoiler. But that is where we're at. That's how we're going to approach this today. Did I do justice, Matthew? Anything you'd add before we dive in?
Yeah, I'm going to try to use, we write a lot of content on the website, obviously, and we get a ton of comments in whether it's Facebook or on the posts themselves, and from various points of view on all the topics. So what I'm hoping to do is try to draw from some of those comments that people have made. And so they're realistic arguments that you might be sitting there thinking, I agree with that. So it's not going to be some out of left field crazy notion, but realistic comments and concerns that people might pose for both sides, for my side of the argument, at least.
Yeah. I'm not trying to be some crazy, stupid, clueless, far-fetched, loser. We're trying to make sensible, legitimate arguments on both sides of the debate. I'm glad you said that.
Yep.
Okay. So with that, I'm going to start with my opening arguments, Matthew. I'm going to start broad, and then we're going to get into some of the specifics. But here's the broad scope thing. And I'm just, again, moving forward, I'm just going to own this, okay? Regardless of any personal feelings. So here's the deal, man. If a gun was meant to be modified, it would have come differently. A manufacturer makes and sells a gun the way they intend for that gun to be, right? The way they expect it to perform at its peak performance is the way they make it. And so conceptually, I think that the idea that changing a gun, modifying it, upgrading it in any respect is basically saying, better than the company that made the gun. And that's, to me, is outlandish. Like the idea that you think you know more than Glock knows about making a gun, that you know better than Sig Sauer how to make a quality handgun it's just, that's crazy. That doesn't make any sense to me. Clearly, these companies have entire teams, floors of buildings of people who are professionals in this industry who design and manufacture firearms. And surely they know best how to put out the product that they want to put out there. And I think that the other thing I see a lot of, Matthew, people like you doing is I see that you guys you're taking a gun, let's say it's a $400 or $500 gun, and you'll go out and spend $150 on sights, $100 on a trigger upgrade, $200 on a stipple job, $100 on some slide cuts or serrations. And all of a sudden it's like, you just got this really sweet, awesome, updated gun, but you actually spent $800-900 on it. And you could have taken that money and bought a gun that was an $800-900 gun that, in my opinion, would have been a better firearm, that came already upgraded, that was more expensive out of the gate, but it has all these features that you were attempting to achieve. And they came stock from a factory with a warranty the way it should be. So that's my overarching belief here in this conversation today.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your side of that of the debate there, but when it comes to firearms, You're right. There are a lot of R&D that goes into the designing the guns and making sure they're safe and making sure that specs are right and sights are, proper height and for point of aim and point of impact and trigger pulls are within tolerances and things like that. The problem is that when gun manufacturers make their guns, they make it for a broad audience and they don't make it specifically for my needs. I have small hands, so they don't make a gun. If I want to carry a Glock 19, my hands are a little bit smaller than maybe say Riley's hands, and it might fit his hands better. So I might have to adjust that grip so I can still get the benefits of, the same sight radius or the same magazine capacity or whatnot. But for my puny little hands, I got to be able to, reach the slide stop easier. So I think while the premise of making a gun that is, best for everybody, but not or good for everybody, but not best for that one individual buyer, we modify all kinds of things. We modify our cars with different things. If you own a truck, you probably, half the truck is modified with aftermarket products. So we modify a lot of things. And I think that's kind of our nature to modify it. So not only does it feel like our own, but it fits what we need and how we want to use it. So I think modifications are totally good. And I actually think they're probably necessary if you want to shoot that gun to its peak, potential.
So you started with grips. So I think we need to talk about that first. You used as an example that you have smaller hands, and I'm very normal. I'm the quintessential average American male. I'm 5'9", 185. So I'm just like average. I'm the average American male, which means that I pick up a Glock 19, it fits my hands. I pick up a Glock 43, it's a little small for my hands, right? I go pick up a X5 and it's a little big for my hands. So you know what I do then? I buy the Glock 19 because it fits my hands. Like I don't, you want a Glock 19, but you want to modify it to fit your hands. And my world's like, well, then go buy a Glock 48, bro. Like that, Glock has already made guns that fit your hands. And in fact, a lot of manufacturers from the factory come with different back straps or other grip modules and things like that. Sure. that allow for that. So I think that there's enough companies out there making guns in enough different sizes that you can go find a gun that fits your hands and has whatever other criteria you probably need, especially if you're willing to spend the money that you would have spent on modifications. Then you can get things right out of the performance center or out of a higher end, more expensive gun that might normally feel like it's out of reach, but ultimately you're going to spend that much anyway after you do things like modify things for grip. And there's other things related to grip, but I'm going to start there.
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned one aspect of the grip, right? Like the size of it, and that's true. There's things that you could buy a smaller gun that might have a smaller grip, or maybe you go to a single stack that's a little bit skinnier. But when you do that, you compromise the other feel of the gun, right? Like the balance. We know that Glock, they make all kinds of different, length. They put like a 19 with a smaller grip, like a 23 slide with a 19 grip, right? So to throw different balances where you might want a longer slide on a shorter grip, or a longer grip on a shorter slide, because all that matters as far as how that gun feels in your hand, how it balances. And so, while you're right, there are different size grips, and that is one aspect of buying, one Glock versus another. There's more that goes into it than just the actual size and how it fits in your hand. To the feel and the balance of the gun. So I would think that there's definitely a purpose if it was just, hey, Glock would just make a small, medium, and large size grip, kind of like SIG. But even we see in those grips, they have the P320 small, medium, large, and then they have like these intermediate ones where they have the X grip that's sculpted a little bit differently, and it's just the hair, below a large but above a medium, and it's so even SIG in their effort to kind of standardize a size of grip, can't do it because the human hand and the balance of the guns are so different and so tuned to the slide length and all that it really goes beyond just the size of the grip.
Perhaps. I still think there's a lot of guns with lots of different sizes of grips, and I think that a savvy buyer is going to make sure that they buy a gun that fits their hands to begin with. And I think that's my thought there. But I see a lot of people like you, Matthew, out there doing the stipple jobs. Oh, I gotta poke holes and in this plastic, or bring up these little dots, and I have to pay somebody sometimes hundreds of dollars to make my grip of my gun feel more like sandpaper,
Right.
versus the way it comes. And I think that this is ultimately just a way to make up for a poor grip. I think that a true shooter, if they train and they have good skills, can go pick up any gun and just grip it properly, and they shouldn't need to put down tons of money to create a stipple job that, in my opinion, does nothing more than give you something cool to post on Instagram.
Yeah, well, and you kind of hit kind of the angle of, if I'm a really good shooter, right, that I should be able to pick up any gun and shoot it relatively well. And I think that fundamentally that's a sound concept, right? Like we should be able to right, we should be able to pick up a gun and the fundamentals should transfer. However, it's not always the case, and not everybody has the same abilities. So, for example, somebody who has diminished hand strength, having a more friction on the grip, that might actually help them. Where sure, they could shoot every gun the same, but this gun that is stippled, or that has an applied grip that gives them more grip friction naturally, inherently, just because of there's more surface area and it's more aggressive, they shoot it better. Given everything else, I put two 19s together, one stippled or has grip, application on it that makes it grippier, and this one doesn't. If they have, they apply the same fundamentals, this one they will shoot better because inherently they can control the gun a little bit better. It might not be noticeable where, I go from sucking as a shooter to, I'm Jerry Mitchell, but those things may give that shooter a little bit more confidence in controlling the gun. And we know that if you don't feel comfortable controlling the gun, that's one of the biggest things with new shooters is, I feel like the gun's going to fly out of my hand. I'm concerned about the recoil. And so that translates into major anticipation and major questioning of, am I doing this right? And that. So once you can kind of put that to the side of, yeah, you can control the grip or the gun, and this grip enhances your ability to do so. I think that, that can definitely go a long way into giving that shooter some confidence in their abilities. And it does look cool and it does cost money, but I think that putting grip where you want it compared to where Gaston Glock thinks it should go, or that some engineer at Taurus thinks, or the grip zone, right? I don't need like somebody to tell me where the grip zone is. Like, I want my own grip zone, so I'm going to put grip zone where I want it, and you guys can do what you want. But I think that that's something that individual shooters want to be able to control is how much friction on this gun. So, and the cost, frankly, isn't terrible. You can, as long as you're not, you take your time, you could probably do it on your own. I've seen some butchered frames, but some decent ones out there, homegrown. So,
I mean, it sounds to me like it's maybe going to make a minor difference in the ability to shoot well, whereas just training to grip a gun properly, is probably a better use of one's time and money, because you get a bunch of other benefits beyond just, I can grip this gun better. And it also comes back to what I said earlier when we were talking about grips, in that manufacturers make guns with varying degrees of stippled grips. So if you want something smooth and shiny or whatever, like, that's out there. If you want something that's like feels like sandpaper, no problem. Like, those guns are already on the market. Just go buy the one that has the grip you want. So it feels like, once again, we don't necessarily need to modify stuff. You just go buy the one that's got whatever degree of stippling you want, or whatever the grip zone that you love.
But if you've already spent your money on that gun, right? You have a holster for it. You've bought sights for it. You bought, it's a 9mm. You bought all kinds of 9mm ammunition, whatever it might be. You like that brand, whatever, and you've already invested money in that, instead of having to scrap that or say, what am I going to do with this? I don't have enough money for that. It might be a lower budget solution or fix, right, to instead of scrapping that whole gun and having to go out and buy a new holster and all kinds of stuff. So that's one benefit of doing it kind of on your own, or adding a modification versus getting an entire new gun.
Though I worry about, Matthew, things that void warranty. So when we're talking about an expensive, potentially lethal instrument, it seems to me that we should do everything possible to maximize our ability to send a gun back into a manufacturer. And so, you do something silly like, get a stipple job done on your grip, and then you have some other issue with this gun, and you go to do a warranty claim, and now you can't do one because the stippled grip that you did, which is unrelated to the issue completely, it just voids your warranty outright. Don't you see that as an issue?
I think voiding a warranty can be an issue. However, I can't think of, I've warrantied one gun, and that was an internal mechanism component that would have had probably no issue whether I put applied a Talon grips to it or not, or changed sights or not. That wouldn't have affected the warranty on that particular thing. And I think if a warranty is great, I would question people to think about, when was the last time you warrantied your gun, and in a way that manufacturer said, hey, have you applied Talon grips to your gun? I remember when I sent my gun into SIG for warranty, I had Talon grips on it when I sent it in, and they didn't. I mean, it wasn't like, they poo-pooed on it because it had Talon grips. So I think some modifications internally may say, hey, hold up, you guys kind of changed the sauce that's inside. But externally, surely if you stippling and you puncture through and cause some sort of problem with the frame, that, you could damage a frame, of course. But I think most of the modifications that one would make wouldn't void a warranty that you would typically warranty a gun for. I just don't see warranties for external type things on guns. Mostly it's internal, like a recall or something like that.
Well, teach their on the grip. I think I've said my 2 bits. Let's transition, Matthew. And one of the things I see people doing all the time is upgrading sights. And this is another one of those things where I'll just reiterate some of the issues with sights, because, like I said earlier, the manufacturers provided the sights that they think work well for the gun. So I don't know why. I think I know more about a gun than Smith & Wesson does, who makes them. The sights, I think, I also have to be concerned about potentially doing damage to the gun when I'm changing out the sights, or taking it to a gunsmith to do it. And expense, my goodness, sights are not cheap. You're probably talking about $80 to $150, $200 for an upgraded pair of sights. Is it really going to make that big of a difference?
Yeah, that and sights. If I had a magic wand, I'd wave it and say sights should be like half the cost of what they are, but they're very important. So, they do demand kind of a higher price tag. I know they're tiny, but sights are so important to how you shoot that gun. I mean, if you think about how you shoot the gun, even in self-defense context, if you're not point shooting, which, probably 3 yards and in, right? If anything outside of that, where you're using either a flash sight picture type thing, or you're using, fundamental marksmanship, the sights are super important, and how your brain and eyes perceive those sights is super critical into how quickly you can shoot, how quickly you can acquire those sights under what lighting conditions. And the problem is if you look at Glock, I'll use Glock as an example. Their sights notoriously have been horrible. Like their stock sights, unless you buy, their night sights, were plastic. And I mean, there's sure that you could argue, well, the gun itself is plastic, but sights get banged up and nicked. And I've seen sights that people don't even realize, but they're bent, and they're they got a little divot in there because somebody hit their sight on something. And so manufacturers, for whatever reason, they haven't caught on to putting decent self-defense sights on. I would say up into maybe a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, where they started to actually just come standard and say, hey, we're not going to make these sights an upgrade from the manufacturer, because Glock will say, oh, you can upgrade your sights, or SIG would say you can upgrade your sights. Well, because they know that better sights are better. And so they ship you this gun with lower quality sights at a cheaper price and say, well, upgrade your sights. Well, why not just upgrade them to begin with? Because those are garbage. So, those shooters were going and buying sights from different companies rather than SIG or Glock. So they say, why don't we get a piece of the pie and we'll sell it, from the manufacturers. That's what I think. So they realize sights are important. We're not living up to our the bill as far as putting good sights on our guns. People are going out and changing them all the time. And so, I mean, you mentioned earlier about Jerry Miculek. I guarantee you that guy could pick up a gun with stock sights and shoot it well, but he would probably say, if I put these sights on, I would shoot it better because I perceive the sights better, and they, this and that. So I think sights are probably one of the best upgrades you can make on a gun, and it will not void a warranty. Sure, you could destroy the gun, you could damage the gun, but you can do it right and you can do it wrong. And so I think getting the right sights really important, and pays off huge in the long run. And sure, training goes into that as well, but these little modifications can help you shoot the gun a little bit better while you're training. It's not one or the other, right?
I think that you just, some of the things you said, I think go counter to your argument. I mean, let's talk about durability first. You mentioned that some of these sights that come are not, very durable. You see nicks and stuff on them. I don't think any sights are infallible. There's no, it's not like there's some magical aftermarket sights that also don't break. In fact, we could Google it right now, and I'm confident I could find plenty of situations where some of these fancy fiber optic, tritium, light pipe, whatever things have broken. In fact, sometimes they're even more subject to breaking than traditional stock sights. And you said it yourself, if you're that concerned about plastic sights, I'm wondering why you bought a plastic gun. It's the same kind of polymer material. So I think that the argument could be made that, durability, maybe it's true that these sights are slightly more durable than those, but I think to suggest that as a general rule, stock sights are less quality than, or less likely to break than aftermarket sights is, I think, completely ridiculous. I also think that, you mentioned cost. Yes, obviously training and gun modifications are not necessarily mutually exclusive, right? It's not always a binary decision. I either get training or I get this gun modification. For some people it is, and in a given moment it might be. In a given moment, I might say, I got $150 to spend. Am I going to go buy it to take a class, or am I going to buy a pair of upgraded sights? And so in that moment that someone has to make that decision, I think that it's easier to buy a thing than it is to buy skill. And so a lot of people end up buying something like upgraded sights thinking it's going to make them better.
Yeah. And that's a problem I think that's a problem with our minds and our ability to put work in, rather than a problem with the sites or the modification itself, right? Like, I think the desire to get a fix easily, right? Like, I don't want to put in work, or these sites might make me shoot better, so I won't put in the work. I'll just buy the sites. I think that's a problem with the person or our motivations, rather than a problem with or a condemnation of the sights not being beneficial, right? Like, we definitely, if you had to put it on a scale and say, right now you have $100, should you buy sights or should you train? I would say it depends, because if you don't know what you don't know and you haven't trained at all, I would say go train. If you're training and you're kind of getting to the point where you're saying, I think I could benefit from using these sights because I understand now all these other fundamental principles of shooting, and I think that my sights would help me, or having X type of sight, maybe a night sight or maybe a fiber optic sight might help me under this circumstance. My eyes are getting a little older and things, I can't pick up colors as well. I think at that point, then you take that $100 and you move it towards sights. But that's a hard thing to say. Pick one versus the other, but certainly, especially in today's day, people are strapped for cash, and training is expensive, ammunition's expensive. So there are a lot of people trying to just, kind of get by. But I wholeheartedly believe that there is a time where, you kind of outgrow that stock gun, and you have to upgrade it because you want to push the envelope just to push it a little bit further, see what more can I get out of this gun.
Well, one other thing you said that I think kind of could support either side of this argument, but you said yourself that a lot of gun manufacturers today are shipping guns with upgraded sights, whatever that is. And so, if you really care about those different sights, I think that there's options. A person could just go buy the gun that way from the market. But another thing that I think is an issue for me with sights is, I guess, two things. One, people like you are always saying that, well, I can see it better in the dark. To me, that's a little bit phony baloney. For one, I don't ever plan on shooting in complete darkness. I mean, isn't that a safety concern? Don't we all talk about the safety rules and knowing that we have to identify our target? And so if I'm really in pitch dark, I shouldn't be shooting. Wouldn't you agree? So how big of a difference are these night sights, really, when we're talking about situations where I have to be able to see at least well enough to see my threat?
Yeah, I think there's a misconception about night sights in that, you use them when you can't see anything. And obviously, to your point, we don't shoot, when we can't see anything, right? We wouldn't know, even if the sights were aligned, we wouldn't know what they were aligned on, right? Night sights are beneficial, I think, in their purpose is more suited for lower light, right? Where you can't really discern where that rear sight is in relationship to the front sight in relationship to the rear sight, or in relationship to what you're shooting at, rather than a total pitch black, blindfold over your eyes type darkness. So there is application for night sights. We could debate whether, how probable it, or how likely it is that you're going to need to shoot in low level. I guess it depends on the person. If they work at night, they work nights, or they normally pass through parking structures that are a little lower light areas, I guess they would have a higher probability than somebody who never leaves their house, after, the sun goes down. So I think we could argue about the effectiveness or the purpose of them, or not the purpose, but how practical they are. But it's kind of a misnomer to say that they're only for pitch black night. They do have a purpose in lower light.
That seems fair, but I don't think that sight alignment is rocket science. I'm hearing what you're saying, and I think that the argument here is that, well, I want to be able to acquire sights quickly. We're talking about lining up a post in the middle of two other posts. Like, it just doesn't actually seem that complex to me. And ultimately, it sounds like a training issue. Like, it sounds like a person should be able to learn to line up, a stick between two other sticks and be able to do that. And it's hard to believe that because this one's green, or this one's orange, or this one's white, or this one's curvy and this one's flat, like whatever, that those things really ultimately make any significant difference on just the basic theoretic concept here, which is line up post between two other posts.
Yeah, fundamentally it's the same, right? But would you agree that if you could, let's say you could say, I want to make this process 1/100th better, and I have a device that you could put on your gun, and you can afford it, right? Would you do it? Like just you, Jacob, if I could say you don't have to train anymore, just doing this naturally will make it slightly easier for you to see your sights and line them up. Would you do it?
Well, if there weren't any other downsides, I suppose I would, but I think that there's obviously some downsides to that. I think that your theoretic argument is the premise is false.
Well, I don't see any, like, the downsides of putting night sights on your gun. They work just fine in the daytime. So, they're really no different than your typical iron sight with a white little dot. They just have a little tritium vial in there.
Well, I think that there are some downsides. I think expense, I think cost is one. You mentioned if you could afford it, so I suppose you built in that disclaimer. There's also the tools and or know-how to swap out the sights from the factory, or having to take it to a gunsmith, and there's an additional cost. Now I got to pay a gunsmith to do it. There's a potential concern that these are less durable. I mean, you mentioned earlier that maybe stock sights are less durable, but I think the opposite argument could be made, that all these little light vials and tritium and fiber optic stuff, it's all from, in my world, a material that's arguably less durable than your standard stock sights. So I think there's lots of potential counter arguments or downsides to maybe arguably giving myself a slight incremental, easier to acquire sight picture.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could concede that cost is a factor, and I don't know if necessarily inherently a tritium vial is less reliable than just an iron sight, because I mean, if let's say your tritium vial breaks, you still have your iron sights, so you don't lose anything. In that night sight isn't any more prone to break off than a typical iron sight, right? So I assume that, or I suppose that, if your tritium vial breaks and you no longer have the ability to use a night sight, you still have your iron sights, and you're no worse off than you would if you never had them, and you call in, company X to warranty your night sight, and they send you a new tritium night sight, and you're good to go. But I mean, the downsides, I just don't think, if you can afford it, certainly cost could be a factor, a prohibitive factor in everything, right? That could be the barrier for everything. That could be the barrier why you buy a Taurus versus a I don't know, Staccato 2011, so I don't know. Costs, at some point we have to kind of push costs to the side and say, if you can afford it, because all of these modifications, if you put cost as a barrier, you wouldn't do anything. You probably wouldn't train either.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's a valid point. I don't think I have much more to say on the topic of sights. I think I've presented my side of that one pretty well. People on Facebook think I'm doing a great job being rude. Okay, so Matthew, let's talk about Trigger. Triggers come up all the time. There are companies out there, just like there are companies out there that are dedicated to selling aftermarket sights. We have companies out there that are dedicated to selling aftermarket triggers. And I think that this is also one of those potential fallacies that has caught our industry up. And I think that, it's semi-ridiculous. And so I'll give you a couple of thoughts and I'll let you comment on them. One would be just the safety concern. If we've learned anything from the last 10 years watching the handgun market, it's that it'd be really, really critical that the guns be dialed into a very specific specification to ensure safety. We've seen recalls, we've seen voluntary upgrades, and the tolerances are very tight. It's a very small, minute difference that takes the trigger from being awesome and safe to being not safe. And when we start playing with the trigger, replacing it outright or modifying a trigger, I think that we are often jeopardizing safety for maybe some slight incremental feely better thingy.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if you're super concerned about litigation, that would be, I think there's a lot of people out there that are more concerned about shooting and hitting their target than they are with facing some legal consequence that might potentially may
Legal
never happen.
consequence aside, Matthew, we can debate that one in a minute. I'm talking about outright safety concerns.
Mm.
I'm talking, forget what the court says. I'm talking about my gun going off when it's not supposed to.
Yeah, well, as long as your finger's not on the trigger, that's my only safety I need, right? Like, um, I think we learned that as one of the safety rules. So if you have an issue with lightening your trigger and it makes you more prone to, I don't think that lightening your trigger makes you more prone to stick your finger in and pull it. If you're going to do that on an 8-pound trigger, you're probably going to do it on a 1-pound trigger. So I think that might be a training issue right there. That safety issue.
Yeah, but we've seen examples of guns that the trigger is effectively out of spec, and it makes it
Mm,
so that what previously might have been drop safe no longer is. Right, so it's not
certainly.
just the gun now potentially can go off when it's not supposed to, when the trigger's not being depressed,
Right.
and so I think we see a lot of safety concerns that come up with trigger modifications.
Yeah. Oh, of course. I mean, and there are obviously guns that have come from the factory out of spec or with drop safety issues or safety issues dealing with the trigger itself. So I don't think that that's unique to gun trigger modifications. Certainly, there are some companies that make aftermarket triggers that probably you wouldn't recommend, but to cast a disparaging light on all trigger modifications because a couple companies make poor out of spec trigger bar or what it might be, would I think it devalues the benefit that putting a aftermarket trigger in your gun provides you.
Yeah, let's talk about the benefit, and then I got some legal concerns which you alluded to as well. But this benefit thing, I mean, are all triggers really that different? Right? I mean, ultimately, and I know that we talk about all the time. Oh, the reset is short, or the trigger's got such a crisp break. But I think a lot of that comes down to you're building a certain degree of experience with the specific gun, being able to say, "Hey, I shoot this gun a lot, therefore I know how this trigger feels." Does it really matter if the trigger is like micromillimeters longer of a reset? I don't think it does, based on the way how a finger can move and how quickly a finger can go back and forth. I think ultimately it really shouldn't make that much difference when we talk about this micro incremental difference in feel.
Yeah, and you kind of came back to that argument of like I should be able to shoot every gun that I pick up equally well. And I think if that was the case and trigger modifications didn't do anything, if you went to your local competition, you wouldn't see people modifying their trigger at all. Because if anybody's going to benefit from micro improvements, it's going to be somebody who shoots a lot and is on a timer and says, yeah, I use this trigger and it only gave me a 1/16 of an inch difference in over travel or whatever it might be, right? But my splits went from like 1.8 to 1.4, and maybe for most shooters it's imperceivable and it's not very important, but certainly in a competitive scope it might be super important. And we're talking about we're not a trigger modification might not always result in a lighter trigger pull, right? Certainly a lighter trigger pull inherently, I think you would agree, inherently, if I was squeezing a trigger and it had shorter pre-travel and it was a lighter trigger squeeze, that I could inherently keep the sights on where I want them to be through that trigger pull rather than a heavier one. I think inherently you'd agree, most people would, that a lighter trigger pull is easier to shoot more accurately without pulling so because your tendency isn't to pull the sights off the target. But that's only one aspect of it. The feel of the trigger shoe can give you more leverage. It can feel differently, the way it resets. So all those little things in and of themselves may not be important, but if you get a trigger that does all those things and that kind of jives with how your finger was placed on there, it can make a huge difference, while maybe not turning you again from, none of these modifications are going to turn you from a terrible shooter to a good shooter. Of course, we know that, only, experience, practice, and training is going to do that. But individually, these things can be incremental steps to, once again, making that gun more shootable for you, and making you maybe either more accurate, more confident, whether it's psychological or not. If the end result is that you're shooting it better, it's kind of hard to argue with that.
Nice way to end that sentence. It's kind of hard to argue with that. I'm sorry. Okay, I gotta get back into character. So, but Matthew, I think that I see a lot of people who buy these aftermarket triggers and they fail to install them properly. So even if we're talking about a very highly reputable aftermarket trigger that, from a reputable brand, people often do it wrong, or you got to pay to get a gunsmith involved. And now I'm kind of back to where I started before. If it really makes a big difference to you, this trigger versus that trigger, then just go buy a gun with a better trigger. Are we really going to spend $100 on some aftermarket trigger and pay a gunsmith another $50 to $75 to install it? Wouldn't the $175 justify just buying a different gun that maybe has a better trigger?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people put like chrome rims on a 85 Toyota. So people like to dress up their stuff the way they like it, and some of these modifications sure might only look like, it might only psychologically or visually change it. But if somebody chooses to do that, I mean, I think that's why we live in America. We got the freedom to buy the gun. We got the freedom to buy the aftermarket trigger. I think, if you could find me a company that produces a gun that I could go in there and a la carte pick out, I want this sight from this company, and I want this trigger, and I want this modification to the grip texture and stuff. I think that company would go bananas. I think people would buy it, a lot, because I think that Americans like their stuff and they like it their way. And I think that company would do really well, rather than just kind of force you to buy this and then say, hey, it's perfection, but we know that you're probably going to modify it a little bit.
Perfection. Nice one. All right. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, which you brought up earlier. And I wanted my chance to say my two bits before we got deep on this. And I think that a lot of this comes down to legal liability. I've heard from all of my friends on the cool gun forums that I'm a member of, that if you put an aftermarket trigger on your gun, that's going to have a pretty negative repercussion in a self-defense trial. I mean, maybe sure, my competitive gun, because I'm trying to squeeze out every little inch of performance, but in a self-defense situation, I don't think it's going to make any big difference. So you can respond to that if you want. But more importantly, if this is my defensive gun, then now I got to go to trial and I got to deal with a prosecutor using this against me.
Yeah. Can you, I mean, maybe you have the case pulled up in front of you, but do you know of any cases that have hinged on somebody's, Apex trigger install?
Well, hinged is an interesting word, right? So first off, we would never, there's no way, even if I had intimate knowledge of a case where a trigger came up, there'd be no way to say that the jury who went into a private room and debated this after the fact, that the trigger happened to be the thing that it hinged on for that jury, right? I mean, I think that it's not practical to presume that any of us know what any case really hinges on necessarily. So I think that's your first issue. Second, we have very little information about all the different self-defense cases taking place in this country. I mean, there could have been dozens of these. No, I can't point out one. So, I guess you can put that feather in your hat if you want, but that doesn't necessarily mean it hasn't happened. I mean, there's endless numbers of jury trials out there that very rarely really get any high-level national, regional attention if they don't hit an appellate court or Supreme Court or a district court. So I think to suggest that just because I can't find one on Google, that means it's never happened is probably unrealistic or unfair. I mean, and certainly what we can see, I definitely could point out cases and trials where other seemingly simple things that all of us think don't matter have been brought up. I mean, George Zimmerman is one that's very high profile. So we have the transcripts from that case. And the prosecutor in the George Zimmerman trial brought up the fact that he carried one with the round in the chamber as a way to suggest he was premeditating a crime. So that's not, an upgraded trigger, but it's an example of something that seems rather trivial that a prosecutor did bring up in a very high profile documented case.
Yeah, you bring up the Zimmerman thing. What was the end result of that one?
He was acquitted.
Yeah. So, I mean, even trying to present that as a stretch, didn't fly. And, we know that prosecutors will try anything, to disparage the person, and paint them as some psychopathic killer. I think that if somebody's trying to present me as if my use of force on face value, is reasonable, I don't think that it's going to hinge on a trigger modification. I think that if my use of force is so razor thin of reasonableness that they're going to a trigger modification, I think that if a prosecutor is trying to do that, I think that it's either an indicator that my use of force is pretty rock solid and they can't hit it in any reasonable way, and they're trying to reach at different things to try to paint me out to be something that I'm not, or that it's such a small minute thing that most of the jurors are going to see that that has nothing to do with use of force. And I would argue that if we can't find a case that did hinge on a trigger, then we probably, and we would, if I were to say, okay, I'll accept the premise that there are cases that maybe did hinge on a trigger modification, I think you'd have to also acknowledge and maybe, agree to there's probably cases or shootings that maybe resulted in, that were benefited by a trigger modification, right? Like somebody who maybe theoretically couldn't squeeze that trigger and get accurate shots with a more heavier trigger pull. Now that they have a lighter trigger pull or a modified gun, maybe they did get those shots and they didn't, shoot, miss and hit somebody innocent. So I think on both sides, we could speculate that there are cases for and against. We just really don't know.
I don't think I have anything else to say on gun modifications. Matthew, any final thoughts from you? Anything you haven't said you want to get out?
Modifications are good. America good. Gun mods good.
Well, I think we're going to jump out of character here, and I'm going to just give us both an opportunity to bring up any arguments that the other person didn't bring up, or anything that, had I been on the other side of this debate, I might have said. So Matthew, I'll start with you. What argument maybe did I fail to make in this conversation about gun modifications that I think that might be relevant, or that you've heard people make before?
I think you hit most of them. I think you hit the cost, you hit the legal concerns, you hit the argument training versus modifications. Those are really the big things. But once you take cost away and you kind of push that to the side and you say training's still important, I think it comes down to a personal choice. And but yeah, I can't think of anything that that I would have argued differently. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure that you're some I missed. So
I'm sure there's some both of us missed. I think you did a great job too, presenting both sides of the argument. I think that the trigger one is probably the one that gets the most heated. I think the other ones are a little bit less contentious in our society. There's lots of different ways too to modify. Like I'm thinking about a grip. Like there's lots of different ways to modify a grip. You don't have to, pull out an iron and stipple it. You can put some tape on it, or you can buy an aftermarket like Hogue grip or the Talon grips, or there's so many ways to just test something that's not that expensive. So I think that's relevant. When we were talking about sights, I think that we have to, it's so funny how we love to talk out of both sides of our mouth. Like we'll have someone in our industry who on one side would be like, well, you got to have a super fast draw speed because microseconds count. But then they're like, you don't need upgraded sights. Like, just, like, it's like, well, but if upgraded sights allow me to get a sight picture microseconds faster, then you just got done saying that microseconds count.
Right.
So I think that's my 2 cents on that one, is that time counts. And that same thing is true would be a trigger, right? Like, if I could shoot faster or acquire sights faster and microseconds count in a gunfight, then both those things arguably make it easier to win a gunfight. I always laugh a little bit when I think about people who make the argument I tried to make about my defensive gun and it having the prosecutor using my trigger against me. That just blows my mind every time I hear that argument. You did a really good job talking about that, but I guess what my response is when people say that, Matthew. I say, what argument do you think the prosecutor is going to make? Please explain to me how you think this upgraded aftermarket trigger is relevant in a self-defense trial. Go ahead. Tell me. Like, right. I can't even fathom what the argument is. Certainly, if it's a negligent discharge issue, right? Like, if you're being charged with recklessness or negligence because your gun went off on accident, right? And you're arguing that, hey, I didn't do anything reckless or negligent, and the prosecutor's saying, but you put this trigger on here, and that made this accident more probable. Sure, like, we can have that argument. You bring in your expert witnesses, but if we're talking about a self-defense case, like, you are admitting to pressing the trigger, right? Like, yes, right. I pressed the trigger. I shot that person on purpose. How is the fact that I have an aftermarket trigger at all relevant to my claim of self-defense?
Right.
I don't see that at all. Like, I think that's such a, like, what's the argument? Like, you're a bad person because you're the kind of person who upgrades your trigger.
Yeah.
I don't get that at all. So anyway, I like this comment on YouTube from Crowy Magnum. I don't know how Crow Magnum. He says, so you're saying I need to take my grenade launcher off my everyday carry pistol? I don't think we're saying that. I think we're saying that. I think we're saying any modification that makes you more likely to win the fight without jeopardizing any amount of safety is probably valid. And I think that's kind of where I truly stand on this issue. Matthew, any final thoughts from you?
No, I agree totally. I think if you make a modification, just make it with a purpose. I mean, certainly if you want to Cerakote your gun, that's a modification, right? But it's for aesthetics, and there's things we do for aesthetics on the gun. But I mean, if you're making choices between training and modifications, do the modifications that are beneficial to you, but get the training first, and then you'll realize what modifications, if any, that you want or need to make. But yeah, I agree. Modifications in themselves aren't bad. Certainly there are modifications that probably are better than others, give you more bang for your buck. But yeah, I'm not in the boat of all modifications are bad, and I'm not in the boat like put a grenade launcher on your gun and but I mean, if you want to, right? But it'd be hard to argue for it.
Yeah, on Facebook, Mark makes this comment. He says, any modification that doesn't also increase the risk of collateral damage in the case of the grenade launcher. Right. So, right. There's an appropriate time and place for a grenade.
Thank you, attorney Mark.
Yes, Mark is an attorney. but there's an appropriate time and place for chucking a grenade. I think, we got to accept that, right? So, all right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this, our first attempt at a debate. If you enjoyed this, will you send us an email at podcast@concealedcarry.com or leave us a review on iTunes, wherever you listen to podcasts. Tell us what you liked about it, how we might do this better in the future. And if there's any topics you specifically would like to hear us debate, I know there's probably some legislative gun control type ones that would be valuable in the future. And there's a lot of other ones that would probably be valuable as well. So whatever topics you would love to hear us debate, certainly send us a message and let us know. Again, thank you to Vis Sites for giving us this, for sponsoring this podcast, and in some ways giving us some of the inspiration for this particular topic. Me and Matthew and Riley, who's not here, are all of the opinion that a lot of guns come with sights that are less than awesome. Having really highly visible, contrasting front and rear sights will always make it easier to pick up the sights faster when you're shooting, and faster matters. So that's where we're at on that issue. And obviously there's tons of different competing products out there, and you can all do your own research, but don't forget to check out HiVizSites.com, HIVIZ sites.com. So Matthew, any other final thoughts?
Thanks for switching up the program. I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, that was fun. I felt stupid a lot of times saying things that I actually didn't truly believe, but it worked out just fine.
You did well.
All right, guys. If you're just listening to this, you could go watch the video and you'll see me like stifling laughs and like holding back on several moments there. So for Matthew and I from Ohio and Colorado, thank you for listening. And remember to train right, train often, and train safe so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true. Take care. All right, Facebook peeps, thanks for being here. Oh, did I do it again, Matthew? Did I forget the giveaway?
The giveaway, yeah, the giveaway.
I did. Okay, hold on. We're going to splice this audio back in. So let me find the giveaway info. I know you put it here in our little outline. Oh, I found it. Okay. Before we let you go for this week, we need to give away our weekly prize. So this week, we're giving away the Bump in the Night video training program. You're going to get access to both the DVD and the digital download. So those of you who like putting something in a DVD player, having it tangibly and owning it, you're going to get that. But we're also going to give you access to stream it via your phone or your computer or whatever. Bump in the Night is a great program. It runs about 48 minutes. About 48. I'm pretty sure it's exactly 48 minutes. I could be wrong. But it's an excerpt of our complete home defense training program, and it's a great product. So, Matthew, you got it pulled up, or do you need me to pull the winner?
Nope,
okay,
I got him.
So I would do a drum roll if I thought I could competently do one, but I can't. So who's our winner this week?
Today's winner is Mr. Johnson. I will email you. You are the lucky winner. Check your email. Make sure you check your spam and all that stuff, too, if your last name is Johnson. If not, then try next week.
Given the number of listeners we have, I'm guessing we have lots of Johnsons. So if you are wondering if you're the winner, if you missed the email, you can always contact our customer support team, support@concealedcarry.com. Next week, we are giving away a month 30-day trial of LASRX, which is software that I truly believe in. I know, Matthew, you use it. I was just, the other day, I transferred my license to my my tablets, and because I got this new, it's probably here somewhere. Yeah, I got this new tablet mount thing for my tripod, and so I transferred my LASRX license to my tablet, so I could put it in my tripod. I have a bigger screen that I can use when I'm shooting, but I'm still not, have to plug into a wall or anything. A tablet's really nice that way. So I love LASRX. I'm a huge fan.
Yeah, I echo that 100%.
Yeah, so guys, if you want your chance to get a free 30-day trial to LASRX, go to concealedcarry.com/podcast prize. And of course, that's the same link every week. So every week, make sure, somewhere between about Tuesday and Saturday, you go to concealedcarry.com/podcast prize and fill out that form so you're entered to win our weekly podcast giveaway. All right, and here I'll insert the salutation that I already recorded. So there you go, guys. Appreciate everyone being with us today. For those of you who've been following along on YouTube and Facebook, I tried to read all your comments. They were coming a little bit fast at a certain point there, and I was unable to keep up and reply. But you guys had great input, and you contributed to the discussion, and we really appreciate it. All right, Matthew, anything else before we bounce?
Nope, that's it. Stay safe, guys.
All right. Thanks, guys. Should be back on Thursday at noon. Hopefully, Riley will be here. We'll see you then.